NAYIB Bukele decided to follow his driver, and what he saw when they reached the man's house left him stunned. The steam from a fresh cup of Ataco coffee still lingered on the presidential desk as Bukele reviewed the latest security reports. The numbers pointed to a historic drop in violence, but something else kept tugging at his attention that morning. Recent odd changes in the routes taken by Henry, his trusted driver of 5 years. "Mr. President, the cabinet meeting starts in 20 minutes, his assistant called from the doorway. "Thanks, Lily. Is Henry ready?" "As always, sir. He's waiting in the parking lot." Bukele grabbed his device and headed downstairs to the National Palace's garage. The black armored Mercedes was already there, with Henry in the driver's seat, punctual as ever. "Morning, Henry. Take me to Escalon." "As you wish, Mr. President." The car rolled through the streets of the historic center. Bukele noticed that while Henry followed the usual route, something about his behavior felt off. He kept checking the rearview mirror more than usual, and his normally steady hands showed a slight tremble. They passed a classic pupusa spot. The smell of fried pork and cheese wafted through the bulletproof windows, bringing back memories of childhood mornings. That's when Henry did something unexpected. He veered off course onto El Progreso Street. "Traffic report, Henry?" "No, Mr. President. Just a routine precaution." But there was nothing routine about it. Bukele knew every route approved by his security team, and this wasn't one of them. Henry's phone buzzed. He glanced at it at a red light, fingers tapping nervously on the wheel before merging back onto the official route. "Everything all right, Henry?" "Yes, sir. We'll be on time for your meeting." They were now driving through a quiet, middle-class neighborhood, far from the noisy center. They passed a small local market where an elderly woman was selling Salvadoran quesadillas. For a moment, Henry seemed lost in the scene. "You know you can trust me, Henry." The use of vos, common in Salvadoran Spanish, seemed to tighten Henry's grip on the wheel. His knuckles turned white. "I know, Mr. President, and I'm grateful." The silence that followed felt heavier than the morning traffic. Bukele discreetly hit the record button on his device. Something was going on with the man he trusted most, and he needed to find out what. When they arrived in Escalon, Henry parked with his usual precision. Just before stepping out, Bukele noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out of Henry's shirt pocket. It had something scribbled on it. "La Libertad, 7 p.m. "Thanks, Henry. Could you pick me up at 6? "Of course, Mr. President." As he walked toward the building, Bukele made a decision that would change everything. That night, for the first time since taking office, he'd follow his own driver. "Lily," he said through the comms, "cancel tonight's appointments. I need a plain car, no escorts." "But, Mr. President, the protocol, that's a direct order, and not a word of this to anyone." The gray Honda Civic blended perfectly with San Salvador's evening traffic. Inside, President Bukele, dressed down in jeans and a dark, unbranded shirt, felt oddly exposed without his usual security entourage. "Mr. President, with all due respect, this is insane." Lily's voice came through the discreet earpiece, tense and unsure. "Just keep the line open, and remember, if anyone asks, you're on a private video call with some Asian investors." "Exactly." Through the rearview mirror, Bukele spotted Henry's black Mercedes turning toward Santa Tecla. He followed at a safe distance, silently grateful for the evasive driving lessons he'd taken years ago. Henry pulled up outside a corner store. Kids were playing soccer in the street, using rocks as goalposts. It all seemed normal, except Henry made 3 short phone calls before stepping out of the car. "Good evening, Don Chepe," he greeted the store owner. "Any news?" "All set, Michero. The meeting moved to Doña Rosa's dining room." From the Civic parked half a block away, Bukele pretended to scroll through his phone while memorizing every word. A shaved ice vendor shouted nearby, "Tamarindo for Ryan Chan!" Henry kept walking, heading deeper into a neighborhood where the houses still bore the marks of rougher times. He stopped in front of a yellow house with a small garden full of isote plants. An elderly woman came out to greet him. "Henry, thank God you made it. Everyone's already here. How many families came today, Doña Rosa?" 15 new ones. Things have been tough since they announced the new project." Bukele felt a tight knot form in his stomach. The new project could only mean one thing: his urban renewal plan for Santa Tecla. Henry stepped into the house, and through an open window, Bukele could hear the scrape of chairs and murmuring voices. He moved a little closer, just enough to catch the conversation. "Friends," Henry's voice had a new edge, stronger, more confident. "I know the rumors about eviction are worrying, but I promise we'll find a way through this." "How, Henry? Have you seen the blueprints? They're planning to tear everything down." "I've got contacts in the government, people who might be able to help us." Bukele clenched his fists. His own driver was leading a group that was pushing back against his biggest development project. As a woman exited the meeting, a notebook slipped from her bag and fell to the ground. Bukele waited until the coast was clear before picking it up. Inside were lists of names and addresses, and something that made his blood run cold: a detailed map of the regular routes taken by his presidential convoy. "Lily," he whispered through his earpiece, "I need you to pull all the info you can on the properties in this neighborhood, and I want Henry's full file. Everything." "Sir, that's classified information." "I'm the president, Lily, and I think our head of security needs to see this." As he walked back to the car, a soccer ball bounced toward him. Bukele stopped it with his foot, a move that reminded him of playing in the streets as a kid. "Nice control, mister," the boy shouted. "Thanks, Chero," he replied without thinking, slipping back into old habits. The kid stared at him a little too long, probably realizing he looked a lot like the president. Bukele climbed into his car and drove off. In the rearview mirror, he watched the boy run toward the yellow house, no doubt to tell someone what he'd just seen. The sun was setting over Santa Tecla, and Bukele had the sinking feeling that he'd just opened a door he couldn't close. By 5:30 a.m., the scent of corn and fried pork filled the air around the central market. Henry parked the presidential Mercedes down a quiet alley. Mama Tench's, the oldest pupusa spot in the area, was already coming to life. "Mr. President, this isn't protocol," the head of security said over comms. "The area hasn't been cleared." "I just need 30 minutes. Bukele replied from inside the Honda Civic. "Keep your distance." An older woman stepped out of the pupuseria and hugged Henry like he was her own son. Her hands, weathered from years of kneading dough, trembled as she handed him a yellow envelope. "Thank God, Henry. All the families have arrived." Bukele pressed record on his phone. The whole scene felt like a spy film, if that spy film smelled like pupusas. Henry went inside, and one by one, people began to trickle in. Mothers with sleeping children, elderly folks leaning on canes, wary-eyed young people. No one touched the steaming plates of food. "You know this is dangerous, right?" Mama Tench whispered to Henry. "If the gangs find out." "There are no more gangs, Mama Tench. The president got rid of them." "But the struggle's still here, son. People are still hungry." Bukele moved quietly to the side window. Inside, the room was packed, but all eyes were on Henry as he handed out envelopes like the one he'd received. "Friends," Henry began, "thank you for coming. We've got enough to help 15 more families today. It's not a lot, but it's the difference between eating and going to bed hungry," a mother said, cradling her baby. "Where's the money coming from, Henry?" an old man asked. "Different places, savings, anonymous donations. What matters is that it reaches the people who need it." Bukele's breath caught. The man who knew every detail of his daily movements had been running an underground aid network. "The problem," Henry continued, "is the government's new plan. They're going to demolish this whole area. Mama Tench's, the market, everything." "So what do we do?" Concerned voices echoed through the room. "I have an idea." Henry pulled out a map. "If we can prove that these places, especially the old pupusa spots, are of historical and cultural value—" "Henry," Mama Tench cut in, "someone's watching us." Bukele ducked quickly, but it was too late. A young man had already spotted him and came running. "Hey, stop!" Bukele stood up slowly and took off his cap. A heavy silence fell over the pupuseria. "Good morning," he said calmly, trying to play it cool. "Any chance you've got pupusas de chicharrón?" Henry appeared at the doorway, pale as a ball of raw dough. "Mr. President, It's all right, Henry." Bukele stepped inside. "Looks like we've all got some explaining to do." Mama Tench stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. President, if you're going to arrest us, start with me. This was all my idea." "Arrest you?" Bukele looked around at the nervous faces. "No, senora. I think first I need to try what might be the best pupusas in San Salvador, and then we'll all have a long talk about the future of this market." The sun was rising over the central market, and with it came a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to lead a country like El Salvador. "As you can see in the blueprints, the new shopping center will completely transform the area," said the architect, swiping across a sleek digital model. The officials around the table nodded in approval. Inside a conference room at the San Miguel Administrative Center, Bukele sat silently, face unreadable. "Mr. President," the architect continued, "the economic projections show the project creating 10,000 new jobs." "And the current businesses?" Bukele asked, his thoughts drifting to Mama Tench's place. "They'll be relocated to a modern, air-conditioned food court." "Air-conditioned?" Bukele let out a dry, sarcastic laugh. "Have any of you ever had a pupusa in a food court?" Awkward silence filled the room until a message buzzed on Bukele's phone. It was from Lily. Full report on Henry. Urgent. 5-minute break, Bukele ordered. In his temporary office, Lily stood ready with a black folder. "What did you find?" "Henry Ramirez lost his entire family in a gang attack back in 2015, his wife and 2 children. Since then, he's been using most of his income to help families affected by violence." "How much?" 80% of his salary, sir. He lives in a rented room and eats at local diners." Bukele sank into his chair. Outside, a fried yuca vendor called out in the hot San Miguel sun. "And the aid program he mentioned?" "It doesn't officially exist," Lily hesitated. "But there are records. Over 100 families have received help. Henry's network has been more effective than some of our own government programs." The comm crackled. "Mr. President, they're ready to continue the presentation." Back in the conference room, the architect proudly gestured toward the green areas in the design. "As you'll see, the project is completely modern." "How many traditional pupuserias are in the affected zone?" Bukele asked, cutting him off. "Sorry, sir? Pupuserias, local diners, family-run businesses?" About 50, according to the last survey, but they're old structures, not architecturally significant." "Not significant," Bukele repeated quietly, then stood. "Those places feed families who lost everything during the gang wars. They're not just businesses, they're lifelines." But Mr. President, the development minister interjected, your campaign promised modernization. Modernization doesn't mean wiping out our culture. Bukele walked toward the scale model on the table. Do you know how many people rely on these businesses? The data shows. Don't give me data, Bukele snapped. Tell me about Doña Rosa, who feeds 5 grandkids with her tiny diner. Tell me about Mama Tench, who gives credit to families with empty wallets. Tell me about Henry. He paused, realizing he had said too much. Henry? The minister asked. My driver, Bukele said, staring out the window. A man who's taught me more about El Salvador in 3 days than you all have in 3 years. Mr. President, the architect stammered, the project's already been approved. Not anymore, Bukele said, turning to the door. We're redesigning it, and this time we're going to listen to the people who actually live here. But what about the investors? We'll find a middle ground. He stopped in the doorway. And by the way, I want a full list of every traditional business in the area. Names, stories, and how many families they support. That could take months. Then I suggest you start today. Pulling out his phone, Bukele called Henry. I need you to take me to every pupuseria in San Miguel. Every single one. As he left the room, the smell of fried yuca mixed with the air conditioning. Out on the street, the vendor was still calling out, unaware that the future of his neighborhood had just shifted. A dusty folder landed with a dull thud on the desk at the civil registry office in Usulután. The clerk adjusted her glasses as Bukele, dressed in plain clothes, waited silently. Case 2015-238, the woman murmured. Gang attack in El Molino sector. Victims, Maria Elena Cortez de Ramirez, Carlos Henry Ramirez Cortez, Ana Patricia Ramirez Cortez. Henry's family, Bukele said softly, a lump forming in his throat. Did you know the Ramirez family, Mr. Garcia? The clerk asked. Yes, Bukele lied. I'm a private investigator. Outside, the sound of a local festival filled the streets. Marimba music played, vendors called out flavors of shaved ice, and the crowd celebrated, completely unaware of the heavy truth unfolding inside that small office. Here it is, the clerk said, pulling out a photo. It showed the whole family, taken just a week before everything changed. Bukele studied the picture. Henry looked younger, smiling, his face free of the worry lines that now marked it. Next to him, a beautiful woman held a little girl, and a teenage boy made a silly face at the camera. Was there an investigation? He asked. Like all cases back then, the clerk sighed. Filed and forgotten. The gangs ran everything. And Henry? What did he do after? She pulled out another document. He sold everything he owned, donated most of it to a community kitchen his wife used to run. Then he disappeared for 2 years, and later he became my driver. Bukele finished the sentence. Sorry? Nothing. Can I see the records from the kitchen? She laid out more files. The Maria Elena kitchen had fed hundreds of families affected by gang violence. The donation records showed consistent anonymous contributions, always matching up with Henry's paydays. Excuse me, said an older man at the door. I didn't mean to interrupt. Bukele quickly stood and adjusted his cap. Out in the hallway, Lily waited with another stack of papers. Mr. President, we found something else. The kitchen wasn't just feeding families, Bukele said, putting it together. It was hiding them from gangs. It was a network of safe houses, Lily confirmed. How do you know that? Because that's exactly what he's doing now with the pupuserias. Outside, kids ran past, chasing an ice cream cart. The festival outside was reaching its peak as a local band kicked off El Carbonero, Lily, I need one more thing. Get me the original plans for the San Miguel project. The plans? But you've already seen— I mean the real plans, Bukele said firmly. The ones that show which companies are buying up the land. Sir, that's classified. I know, but I've got a feeling we'll see some familiar names. His phone buzzed. A message from Henry. Mr. President, I need to speak with you. It's about the real reason for the route changes. Bukele looked at the family photo one last time before placing it back in the file. Lily, cancel my meetings this afternoon. Henry and I have an overdue conversation. At the palace? No, in La Libertad. There's a story I need to hear, all of it. As they left the civil registry, the cheerful festival music followed them, a light tune that clashed with the heavy truths they'd just uncovered. In the plaza, a vendor called out his offerings. Tamarindo! Chan! Horchata! 2 tamarindo, please, said Bukele, remembering it was Henry's kid's favorite. By the time Bukele reached the pier in La Libertad, the sun was dipping into the Pacific. Fishing boats were pulling in with the day's catch. Henry was already there, sitting on a weathered bench, staring at the horizon. My wife loved this place, he said without turning. We brought the kids every Sunday. Bukele sat beside him. A coconut vendor walked by, calling out to the beachgoers. I know everything, Henry, Bukele started. Usulutan, the kitchen, the families. No, sir, Henry replied, pulling an envelope from his jacket. You don't know everything. This is what I've been trying to show you. Inside were photos and documents, company names, early contracts, encrypted emails. The San Miguel project isn't just a shopping center, Henry explained. It's a front for laundering money. The same people who once ran the gangs, they're behind this now. Only instead of guns, they're using real estate. A wave crashed against the pier, splashing salty water onto the documents. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Bukele asked. Come to you? As your driver? Who'd believe me? Henry let out a bitter laugh. Besides, some of the people involved are inside your own government. That's why I changed the routes. I was gathering evidence. And protecting the families who could testify, Bukele said quietly, watching Henry walk toward the railing. The Pupuseria network isn't just about food, Mr. President. It's an improvised witness protection system. A group of fishermen passed by, their nets heavy with silver fish, the smell of fresh seafood mixed with the ocean breeze. Do you know why I chose to be your driver? Henry asked. Because you said you'd change El Salvador. You got rid of the gangs, sure. But the corruption? It didn't disappear. It just changed hands. Bukele joined him at the railing. Far off, the lights from fishing boats blinked like fallen stars. When they killed my family, Henry's voice cracked, I swore no one else would go through that again. The gangs might be gone, but the fear? It's still here. How many families are at risk? Bukele asked. 53. Every one of them has information about this corruption network, and every one of them relies on our pupuseria system to stay alive. A young boy walked up selling grilled conchas. Henry bought 2 portions, something he used to do with his kids. Henry, Bukele said, taking one of the conchas, do you trust me? I trust the man who followed his driver to find the truth, Henry answered. The president? Well, the president still has to prove himself. I need names, every single one. It's dangerous, sir. These people— I'm the president of El Salvador, Bukele said, standing straighter. And it's time we actually change this country. Henry pulled a USB drive from his pocket. It's all here, but if we go through with this— We do it together, Bukele said, holding out his hand. No more secrets, no more detours. An old fisherman walked by, humming an old Salvadoran folk tune. The lyrics floated in the air. The sea carries away our pain. One more thing, Henry said. The families, they need protection. They'll have it. Henry? Yes, Mr. President? Thank you for not giving up on El Salvador. Night had fully fallen over La Libertad. On the pier, two men sat side by side eating grilled conchas, while the fate of a nation shifted quietly with the rhythm of the waves and the songs of the fishermen. The community center in Santa Ana was nothing more than a worn-down room with plastic chairs and an old fan barely moving the hot air. Dressed in a simple blue shirt, Bukele sat in the back row as families slowly trickled in. "I didn't expect to see you here, Mr. President," whispered Doña Carmen, setting down a steaming pot of Café de Palo on a makeshift table. "Today, I'm not the president," Bukele said. "Just someone who needs to listen." Henry entered carrying folders full of documents. Families greeted him like an old friend, some with hugs, others holding back tears. "My friends," Henry began, "we have important guests today and some important news." A young woman stood holding a baby. "Is it true they're evicting us, Henry? My mother-in-law says they've already started measuring the land." "That's why we're here," Henry replied, glancing at Bukele, who gave a small nod. "But before anything else, I want each of you to share your story. The country needs to hear them." For the next 2 hours, Bukele listened to stories no government report had ever captured. Don Rafael, who lost his auto shop to extortionists and now sold pupusas. Maria, whose husband disappeared after trying to expose a corruption ring. Entire families surviving in the shadows, held together by the underground support system Henry had built. "My pupuseria's nothing fancy," said Doña Elena, "but every night we feed 3 families who can't afford a meal. Like the saying goes, if 2 can eat, there's always room for a 3rd. Suddenly, a flash of light filled the room. A young photographer from the local paper had snapped a picture through the window. "Security!" Henry shouted. "No," Bukele said, standing up. "Let him be. It's time the country sees the truth." He walked to the front of the room, the fan gently rustling his hair. "For years," he said, "I thought leading a country was about numbers, stats, and big projects. But you've shown me something different. It's about people, about stories, about dignity." He pulled out his phone and projected documents onto the wall. "These are the real blueprints for the San Miguel project. The companies involved, the dirty politicians, everything." A low murmur ran through the room. "But Mr. President," Don Rafael said, "those people, they have real power." "The truth has more," Bukele replied, "and nothing stronger than a united people who refuse to back down." Henry passed around cups of coffee while Bukele explained the plan. The Pupuseria network would officially become part of the National Witness Protection Program. Every small family-run spot would be preserved, updated, but kept true to its roots. "We don't want charity," Maria said firmly. "We want justice." "And you'll have it," Bukele promised. "But I need your help, your stories, your proof, your courage." The photographer had vanished, but the moment had already been captured. By morning, all of El Salvador would see the image of their president sitting in a community center, sipping Café de Palo with victims of corruption. "Sir," Lily called from the doorway, "social media is blowing up. That photo's already viral." "Good," Bukele said, sipping his coffee again. "Let the country see where their president really stands, and who he stands with." Night settled over Santa Ana. In the warm glow of the community center, surrounded by the scent of coffee and pupusas, a quiet revolution had begun, not with weapons or violence, but with voices, stories, and the fierce dignity of a people who refused to be silenced any longer. Meanwhile, the meeting room at the Sonsonate mayor's office buzzed with tension. On every screen, news outlets replayed the same photo: El Salvador's president seated among the people. Headlines swirled with talk of conspiracy, secrets, and underground networks.
This is a scandal!
The Minister of Development slammed his hand on the table. The president of El Salvador involved with illegal groups. With victims, Bukele corrected him calmly, not looking up from his tablet. With Salvadorans who've survived violence and corruption. Henry stood quietly near the door, the weight of his resignation letter heavy in his pocket. Lily rushed between stacks of documents, trying to stay ahead of the flood of calls. "Mr. President," said the communications advisor, "we can still spin this. Say it was an unannounced official visit." "No," Bukele stood up. "No more lies." The smell of tamales drifted in from the central plaza, where a growing crowd had started to gather. Some carried signs supporting the families. Others demanded answers. "Henry," Bukele called, "that resignation letter in your pocket, tear it up." "But sir, I caused all of this." "If you step down now, they win." The minister straightened his tie awkwardly. "Mr. President, the investors are worried. The San Miguel project is canceled," Bukele said, sliding a folder across the table. "And I'd advise a few of you to check your bank accounts before the Attorney General does." A few officials turned pale. On the screens behind them, more images began to roll. Families sharing their stories, pupuserias serving as shelters, a quiet network of survival and dignity built in the shadows. "Do you know why I became president?" Bukele looked each person in the eye. "To serve El Salvador, not investors, not politicians, the people." An elderly woman entered, pushing a cart full of shaved ice, looking confused. "Excuse me, I'm looking for the permits office." "Doña Maria?" Henry recognized her. "What are you doing here?" "I came to renew my vending license." She pulled out a wrinkled paper. "They said they're shutting me down because of that picture with you." "No one's shutting you down," Bukele said, walking toward her. "How long have you been selling minutas?" 30 years, since the gangs." Her voice cracked. "Minister!" Bukele turned. "I want a full list of street vendors and small businesses in every city. And I want a new support program that protects their dignity while helping them grow." "But sir, that's a presidential order." Outside, the crowd had grown. The people of Sonsonate stood somewhere between fear and hope. "Henry," Bukele asked, "are the families ready to testify?" "All of them, sir. They're just waiting for your signal." "Lily, set up a press conference, right here, in Sonsonate. Let El Salvador see that its president doesn't hide behind palace walls." "And what about the investors?" The minister pushed again. "We'll find others, honest ones. Ones who understand that modernizing El Salvador doesn't mean ripping out its soul." Doña Maria began wheeling her cart away. "Wait!" Bukele called out. "Do you have chan flavor?" "Of course, Mr. President." "2, please." "Henry," he said, smiling, "remember when Ana Patricia used to love chan minutas?" Henry's eyes welled with tears. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was something deeper, a turning point for El Salvador. In the plaza, the smell of tamales and minutas mixed with the electric tension in the air as the nation held its breath, watching what would happen when a president chose to stand with his people. The convention center in the Zona Rosa had never seen a press conference like this. Alongside the credentialed reporters were street vendors, pupuseria owners, and families from Henry's network, filling the rows of chairs.
"This isn't protocol,"
the chief of protocol grumbled.
"This is the real El Salvador,"
Bukele replied, adjusting his mic. The cameras went live. Henry moved quietly, helping guide the families to their seats. Doña Rosa from the pupuseria arrived carrying a tray of fresh pupusas, her way of rejecting the catered food at the event.
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
Bukele began,
"I'm not here to give a political speech. I'm here to tell a story.
The story of a driver who taught me more about leadership than all my advisors combined." Images began playing on the giant screens. Maria Elena's kitchen in Usulutan, the families in Santa Ana, the small businesses that made up the quiet lifeline of hope. For years, these Salvadorans did what the government couldn't. They protected and supported those who suffered from violence and corruption. Manuel tensed as photos of his late family appeared. Bukele kept going. "Some will say I broke protocol, that I put presidential security at risk. But I ask you, what matters more, protocols or the lives of our people?" A woman rose from the back of the room. "Mr. President," her voice shook, "my husband spoke out about the corruption behind the San Miguel project. He disappeared the next day. Henry's network saved me and my son." Camera flashes burst across the room. From the corner of the room, Lily motioned frantically to her watch. But Bukele raised his voice, making his announcement clear. The launch of the National Program for Community Protection and Development. Every pupuseria, every small business that had served as a shelter would now receive official support. A wave of whispers moved through the crowd. "But more importantly," he continued, "I will be presenting evidence to the Attorney General's office, evidence of corruption involving top government officials. El Salvador didn't just defeat the gangs. We're about to take down the ones who tried to replace them." Henry stepped forward with a folder. "The testimonies are ready, sir." "No more hiding," said Bukele, taking it. "No more fear." An elderly woman stood up, holding a pupusa in her hand. "What about our businesses?" she asked. "Are you going to force modernization on us?" "No, ma'am," Bukele replied with a smile. "You're going to teach us how to modernize without losing what makes El Salvador special. Every pupuseria, every food stand, every vendor will have a say in how this program works." The screens lit up, displaying the new plans. Community centers with space for traditional vendors, development that embraced, not erased, the local culture. Then Bukele turned to Henry. "I need you to lead this program." "Sir, I'm just a driver." "No, you're the man who never gave up on El Salvador, the one who reminded me what it means to serve." Applause broke out, spontaneous and strong. On social media, the hashtag #RealElSalvador was trending worldwide. "One last thing," Bukele added, lifting a pupusa into the air. "I propose we declare Mama Tenchi's pupusas a national cultural treasure." Laughter, clapping, and a few happy tears filled the room. In the middle of Zona Rosa, surrounded by wealth and modernity, El Salvador was reconnecting with its soul. Henry looked at his phone. A photo of his smiling family filled the screen. "We did it, mi amor," he whispered. "We did it." The bells of the Metropolitan Cathedral rang out over San Salvador as crowds filled the plaza below. The scent of incense mixed with the smell of freshly made pupusas from street vendors, now fully licensed, who served the people gathering for the ceremony. "Nervous?" Bukele asked, adjusting his tie in the sacristy mirror. "A little," Henry admitted, gripping the folder with the new logo of the National Community Development Program.
I never thought I'd be on this side of the car.
I never thought my driver would be the one to show me how to truly lead. People had traveled from across El Salvador to be there. Doña Rosa had set up her mobile pupuseria by the colonial fountain. Mama Tenchis led a group of traditional cooks preparing the community banquet.
Mr. President,
Lily peeked in through the door.
We're ready.
Inside the cathedral, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. Families in the program sat side by side with government officials, though some of the usual faces were noticeably absent, now under investigation. Henry made his way to the pulpit, his footsteps echoing in the solemn space. 10 years ago, he began, I lost my family to violence. I thought the pain would destroy me, but my wife Maria Elena always said, where 2 pupusas feed 2, they can feed 3. That pain became purpose. In the front row, Doña Carmen, who'd started it all with her humble pupuseria, wiped tears from her cheeks. Today, Henry continued, we're not just launching a government program, we're celebrating a people who never gave up, who stepped up when no one else would. Bukele approached the altar carrying a wooden box. In this box, he announced, are the first property titles. Every business that was part of the protection network now owns its location. No more fear of being pushed out. No more doubt about your place. Applause thundered through the cathedral's high ceilings. But there's more. Bukele held up another document. Congress has just passed the Culinary Cultural Heritage Act. Our traditional pupuserias are now protected by law. A small girl walked up to the pulpit with a flower crown in her hands. She was the daughter of one of the families saved by the network.
For Don Henry, she said sweetly, the angel of pupusas.
Henry knelt to receive the crown, his eyes glassy with tears. Maria Elena, he whispered, looking up.
We did it.
The afternoon sun poured through the stained glass, casting a rainbow of colors across the cathedral. Outside, the smell of fresh pupusas drew in even more people. El Salvador, Bukele said in closing, isn't just a country, it's a family, and families look after each other. The formal ceremony ended with a traditional blessing, but the real celebration had just begun. In the plaza, hundreds of community tables stretched as far as the eye could see. Pupusas, tamales, fried yuca, and shaved ice in every flavor filled the plaza. Henry paused beside the presidential Mercedes, running his hand along the steering wheel one last time. Are you sure you don't want to keep driving me around? Bukele joked. The people need me behind a different wheel now, Mr. President. The people need all of us, Henry, every single one of us. As the sun set over San Salvador, families gathered to share food and something even more important, hope. The sounds of marimba music danced through the air, mixing with laughter and conversations that felt lighter than they had in years. In one corner of the plaza, near Doña Carmen's pupuseria, stood a small altar honoring the victims of violence. But tonight wasn't about mourning, it was about celebration. Celebrating a driver who never forgot his compassion, a president who finally looked past politics and saw his people, and a country that turned its pain into strength, its fear into something bold and beautiful, hope. El Salvador hadn't changed because of decrees or mega projects. It had changed through the quiet power of everyday kindness, through the scent of pupusas shared under open skies, through dignity reclaimed by those who'd long been forgotten. And somewhere above, Maria Elena was smiling. Because where there was once room for 2 pupusas, now there was room for an entire country.